Hello, everybody. We're so excited to have such a big crowd here. Welcome to our live chat today on managing risk through documentation. I'm Amrita from part 3, and I will be hosting the session and just going through some housekeeping. So the discussion is going to be for about 30 minutes, and then we will be taking questions. Feel free to use the Q&A module to put in your questions throughout the webinar. We'll keep an eye on them. You can also upvote other people's questions if there's certain ones that you're keen to get a response on. Because of the size of the group today, we are definitely not going to get to everyone's questions. So we will pick a few, and then anything we don't get to, we will follow up with you after the webinar. All right. So now I'm going to turn things over to Jack.
Thanks, Amrita. Thanks for joining, everybody. Today we're talking about something that I think every single architect, engineer, owner, and contractor is feeling. Risk is going up. Projects are faster, they're more complex, they're more legally constrained, and yet the documentation, in particular, the documentation burden on the design team just keeps climbing. We're not here today to talk software. We're not here to talk legal theory. This is a practical conversation about where risk actually emerges, why it shows up in some places over and over, and what teams can realistically do to reduce it, manage it, and maintain it. I'm joined by Luke from AIA Contract Docs, Barbara from BL Companies, who's seen more real-world project breakdowns and more real-world experience than most people can imagine. So I'm going to hand over to Luke. Tell us why we're here.
Sure. Thanks, Jack. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the discussion today. Excited to see so many people from all over the country joining and listening in. I'm Luke Diorio. I'm the Senior Vice President of Partnerships and Strategy at AIA Contract Documents. Been with the business since roughly 2016 in a couple different roles. I will confess I'm not an attorney. So just we'll keep the legal questions to the side, and I'll advise you to talk to your counsel. But as it relates to this sort of concept of AIA contract documents and risk management more broadly, in addition to solutions like Part 3 and what Barbara deals with on a day-to-day basis, as Jack mentioned, risk is increasingly changing, right? It's going up, it's being spread across the project lifecycle in different ways. And I think that's not going to stop, right? We're using more and more tools on the job, whether it's technology or unique things like drones, et cetera, that are kind of fun. Costs are going up, just in general. And I think that's creating a level of complexity. And you also have more and more counterparties as you continue to do works and scopes increase. So I think that's really sort of creating this interesting dynamic and a need to have sort of this connected, data ecosystem across the project to help you manage those things. Risk is not going to go away, right? It's always going to be there. Unnatural things can happen that create risk, and I think it's really about understanding the tools and resources you have as a firm with your partners to be able to execute against that risk. And I think that's really where the most important sort of ethos is to understand your risk, know how to management, know where they are, and go forward. So with all of that said, I'd love to pass it over to Barbara to sort of talk a little bit more about the sort of real world examples as a tee-up for today's discussion.
Hi, Barb Jocelyn. I am an architect by trade. My current role is the Director of Project Development at BL Companies. We are a 400-person, hitting our 40th year in business. Big E, little a, though. So we started as land development, civil engineering. We have full architecture, including mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural design. So we do pretty much everything, which has been very interesting. As Jack mentioned, I do have a lot of experience. My kids tell me I'm old as dirt. But I did spend the first, 10 plus years working small firms. I owned my own firm for years, which gave me a really unique perspective. Then I went to a very large design architecture only firm. And then for the last 10 years, I've been at BL. So I've seen it from all sides, which makes it very interesting. We are definitely seeing claims on an upward trend. They did dip a little bit during COVID, not great. There's a huge talent shortage in the architecture and many different engineering disciplines, which affects everything we do. we're kind of up against it. Permitting timelines, approval timelines have just grown exponentially across the country, which then the clients are coming at us and saying they want documents done faster. So we're pushed up against a wall on a lot of stuff, and it really forces us to implement better strategies, better tools, templates, all sorts of stuff, as we're integrating it into our documents and everything else.
I had no idea you ran your own firm as well, Bob.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, you've done it all. I think a lot of the sentiment that you're speaking about, that's something that we see a lot of. You're definitely not alone. In my role, I'm co-founder and CEO of Part 3, and everything I do focuses on the construction administration side. Everything is in making sure the design intent is realized, handling the risks, the legal requirements, even the financial requirements for design teams during the build phase. But everything you're touching on, I think that perfectly captures kind of how every architect I get to speak to is feeling. I think the way I think of it is the biggest spike in risk isn't really anything dramatic. We know those things can happen, but the biggest spike in risk is the invisible paperwork gaps, the places that live in between what the contract requires and what actually gets logged or tracked or responded to. That's the risk, is the gaps in between stuff, making sure that's all captured. And that's so, Bob, I'm definitely curious, and tell me some stories about where you are today, and tell me like where have you seen the sort of contract intention fall apart on projects?
There's so many different opportunities to talk about this. And they're always best intentions. None of it's ever that somebody's not doing their job. Usually it's speed. Somebody's trying to answer something too quickly, respond to a client. You get a call about a contract, a new project, and everybody's super excited about it. And like, oh my gosh, this one's going to be great. Big national client. I mean, we have this one where, industrial type project. We put together a typical contract for it, describing it, it's a warehouse, typical lighting, typical energies, electrical needs, typical plumbing needs. Everybody, we're pushing forward on documents to meet expectations. And I don't know, you're weeks away from completion and the client team comes in and they say, oh, hey, we forgot to tell you, we need, this is going to be a fully automated building and we need double the energy, double the electricity. Suddenly it changes the code requirements because there's high racking in it. And everybody's like, oh no.
No problem.
Right?
Let's do it.
Yeah, no problem, except for the fee didn't accommodate any of that. So, like now you got a problem with your scope. Was your scope delineated, right? Probably not. Luckily, that was a great client, and we did iron it all out without, getting to it. But it did show us the gaps, and it highlighted where gaps are and how we could be doing things better. And we do need to cover these things, and you have to have these conversations up front with the clients and ask if they know that. They don't always know up front. Sometimes they don't, but at least you're covered. We create some templates for internal decision-making logs, that generated right out of that. So, it does kind of show you that there's always going to be something. It's just how well you manage it.
Yeah, it's interesting, though. One of the things that if you think about on a project is the unique interconnectedness of the tools you need to have plus the people, right? As you think about a project lifecycle, there's all these unique touch points that involve different people and different resources and tools, whether it's contracts, whether it's drawings, whether it's specs, whether you're in the project and you're thinking about change orders and RFIs and the like. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic where collectively you have to sort of come together on an intention and walk down this path, even though you're only dotted line connected at each point, right? As this sort of project team. We always kind of look at it from that perspective where you sort of have this flow, and at each point you're kind of diving in, depending upon your role, right? And everybody has a role, and you have a scope that you manage against, and then someone else has a scope that you're managing against, and there's inherent conflicts, which is good and bad in some cases. So I'd love to sort of think about those examples, like in your day to day, like what are some really good concrete examples sort of across that life cycle where those risks pop up, right? As you're sort of thinking about the parties you're working with, thinking about the resources you're using.
Well, a lot of the risk is during construction. I think that's when we're very exposed for timelines and responsiveness and everything else. And we actually, as a firm, started using Part 3. We had been using Procore for years, which is, I think everybody on this call probably knows Procore. Big company, nothing disparaging to say about them, but they're made for contractors. They're not made for the architecture or engineering perspective. Part 3 is. So we switched to Part 3 a year ago, and they're helping protect us in that we're managing our own flow, and it talks to Procore, for lack of a better way to say that. Sorry, Jack. But it's helping us do it, and the bottom line is whoever controls the information helps control everything else, right? I mean, I think that's been instilled into me as a project manager for years that, take your own notes. Take your own notes at job meetings, control it. Whoever's taking the notes and distributing the notes, that's where the information is going to look back on years later. So templates for all that kind of information, critical, right? Making sure that we can backtrack, and which we can now in Part 3, and look and say, all right, we answered this RFI in 2 days. How come the GC is telling us it took us 3 weeks to answer it? Because they left it open. But that opens the door for the GC at the end of the job to suddenly there's a delay claim. We don't want to get into the tit for tat, but sometimes you kind of have to. And to have that information helps.
You juggled a couple of different perspectives in your career as well. And you're talking about using Part 3 and Procore and these software that help you handle it. You've also been in a world where you're a sole practitioner, you're running your own firm, and now you're BL, you're running ginormous, sometimes billion-dollar projects. So you've kind of done the full spectrum here. I'm curious, maybe we'll come back to this at the end, but it'd be good to know if you've got any advice for the different types of firms out there. On the call today, we're going to have people from the biggest, most elite firms. Luke, you got a guest trying to say hi. But you're going to have the biggest firms that are going to be running with every kind of documented policy. But I spend most of my time talking to firm leaders that are running studios of 20, 30, 50, 60 people. And you'd be surprised at how many truly think well, that's the contractor's responsibility. Things like maintaining the set, tracking RFI response dates, making sure the right engineers or consultants receive the right document and tracking the time. A lot of firms kind of take the position that I don't want to take on liability that's not mine. I don't want to perform parts of the role that the contractor owns. Can you speak to that at all? How have you found drawing that line between your responsibility versus just making sure you've got your own story and your own data? How do you juggle that dichotomy of not wanting to take on extra but still making sure you're protected?
Without sidetracking too much, I think it was probably, I don't know, good God, 20 plus years ago, the first time I really was involved in a project that went sour at the end. And when you realize it's all about the lawyers and that none of us have any control over anything, it kind of opens up your eyes and you're like, okay, we do have to have good document. We do have to be able to say why things happened, and you can't leave it up to the contractors at the end because they're only protecting themselves. So it is definitely a very fine line of defensiveness, I guess, and being able to kind of because we're not getting paid to do all that. Obviously not. We're barely getting paid enough to do our jobs, right? So I think having the proper tools and putting it in place, but again, just like anything else, it's only as good as your people are using it, right? So having the ease of things, I think definitely helps. It's a constant reminder, and it's just like anything. People will revert back to what's most comfortable to them. So if you make things comfortable and easy, they'll use it. We could probably sideline this whole conversation talking about AI.
Careful.
And the ease of that, but But there's parts of that that are super helpful. I mean, and as long as everybody is comfortable with it, start using AI for notes and team meetings, even if you're only using it internally to file it in a folder somewhere, just in case you have to come back and say, no, this really was discussed, you know. It's definitely tricky. Not easy.
Yeah. And that can be technology's role, right? Fill the gaps, automate, make that easy.
Right.
So it's not an extra function for you.
Yeah, it's interesting to sort of pinpoint AI, right? Really useful tool in the marketplace right now. I think everybody's trying to understand the pieces and parts that could be really beneficial, not just from an efficiency gain or an innovation gain, but also from the risk management gain, right? Like there's a unique opportunity to leverage what is probably the coolest tech out there now today to really hone in on the things that AI can highlight from a risk perspective. And as you think about, you know, just what goes on in a project, and Barbara, you and I talked about this a little earlier as we were kind of getting ready for this, the unique dynamic between, you know, office, project manager, and field, and all of the gaps of information sharing that go in there. You know, and I don't know if we didn't confirm this, whether or not you were using AI and some of those pieces and parts to sort of highlight where there might be information gaps. But that's a really unique use case, right? Where you can start to connect those pieces together and make sure that, hey, you know, as a leader of my firm, I've agreed to these terms in the contract. They outline the scope. They outline the certain ways you're supposed to comply with things. And then project managers are supposed to know that. The field is supposed to know that. And when they get an RFI from you in 2 days, they need to acknowledge that. And so just curious, as you think about those things, you know, where are the gaps that are real world experiences that you're missing? And is there anything you're doing to at least try to fill them?
I think the biggest gap that's the easiest to fill, but also the most, I don't know, it happens all the time, is between the person that writes the contract and the person that's actually executing the documents. So it happens all along the timelines, right? So somebody's writing the scope, dealing with the contract, whether it's an AIA or an in-house template or whatever it is. And then the project manager is jumping in and owning the team and the coordination of everybody. And it's making sure everybody's on the same page, right? Did everybody read the scope? Does everybody know about the scope? Sometimes we jump in, and we do this all the time at BL. We do a lot of what we call program work, which is, you know, the same type of work for similar clients and same clients. And the teams get comfortable. Like, you know, let's just face it, you get comfortable doing something. They jump in, they're like, okay, we have a deadline, we're going to move forward. And somebody forgets to tell them, oh, wow, this changed. You know, so I think it's communication. Couple that with the fact that a lot of us throughout the country are still working in either, you know, somewhat remote hybrid situations where we're not all in the office or together. I mean, we have 18 offices kind of pretty much across the whole eastern part of the country. So even if you were in the office 5 days a week, you're working with people in other offices. So you're still in this, you know, kind of communication thing. And how many different formats of communication do we have? We have clients that are using Teams and Zoom and their own platforms. And, you know, everybody's, it's harder now than I feel like it ever was. You know, I mean, email was one thing, but now we've layered in all these different methods. So I don't even know the answer to some of this stuff. Like, what do you do with all the information? It's overload.
Yeah, totally agree. I feel like the firms who are managing risk best aren't the ones who are negotiating the best contracts. They're the ones who are operationalizing them consistently. What you've done really well, Barb, you spoke earlier about managing to introduce a bit of control through the phase. You were speaking not only control about your teams and your workflows, but like your data, where it needs to live, where certain tasks and actions need to happen. I think like you're literally turning your contract clauses into daily workflows. That's the best way that I'm putting out that you're articulating how you're controlling risk here.
Trying, yeah. Are we 100% successful as anybody, right? Like, I mean, just being real world here. You know, you hope that there's not as many gaps, and you hope the gaps get smaller with each time you do it.
So if we talk a little bit more about mitigating the risk across these different stages, Luke, I'm curious to pull you in here, but you
Sure.
mentioned earlier about trying to start with the standards. So when we talk about like mitigating risk, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we have the benefit of obviously being the industry standard in the marketplace, right? Having been around for 140 plus years. Interestingly enough, the first document was an owner contractor agreement that came out of the AIA. So that just kind of shows you the unique dynamics of being the industry standard in terms of trying to help facilitate the risk management strategies across what we consider to be multiple relationships, right? Our documents are really about like, how do you operate these relationships in a very risky environment? And I think, you know, as we kind of have built out the content set and think about our platform, you know, we're really trying to build this sort of interconnectedness where, you know, just like in a workflow tool, sort of data talks to data, you know, our content talks to other content, right? In terms of follow-on documents, right? You've got the B series documents geared towards the architect audience, which then tie to the C series documents, which are the consultant agreements. We obviously have the infamous G series documents, right? Change orders, payment applications, and the like. And they're all connected, and they're all connected from how they help facilitate the relationship. They're connected in how you as the end user manage them, right? In terms of Barbara's case, like once you have them, you've done them, they now go into a project. And then of course you've got to bring the teams together to sort of operate in that interconnected way, which is super interesting. And I think, you know, our goal as we continue to help to drive value to our customer base and folks like Barbara is, you know, bringing that together, helping them understand that piece and helping them leverage it in a risk management strategy, knowing that then it has to be part of something else, right? It has to be part of how they use part 3. It has to be used how they use whatever else they're doing, whether it's Teams and email and the like. And I think it's, you know, what we've tried to design really fits well with like the solution you've created, Jack, at part 3, right? In terms of its methodology, we are aligned across the life cycle. We're aligned in the family of documents that we have that our customers use. And then of course, the opportunity to layer them in on how they actually do the administration in a part 3. All part of a really strong risk management strategy, knowing that there are always risks that you're going to face.
And you're living and breathing this exact strategy, Barb. Is it working?
I think it's interesting because there's jobs that you have that the life of that contract is the whole job, right? So if the contract isn't good from the day one, right? We had a project, best intentions, again, new client, you're all excited to be working with them. They want the whole proposal and contract done super quickly. So you breeze through it. You probably don't spend quite as much time as you should have QA/QCing it. You think you got, and it's a design build type relationship, sort of. The architecture is full on, but they wanted MEP engineering to be design build. So that's how we've described it, except for in one little section where we actually said we were doing engineering work. So then suddenly, you know, you're doing the drawings and the client's like, well, where's the engineering drawings? And we're like, no, you're going to do that. That's design build. And they're like, no, your contract says you're doing that. So, you know, it's very interesting how, and then, you know, like how much do you really want to start out the relationship, this push-pull negative kind of, it's not the intention. So, you know, put your best foot forward and say, all right, we'll do it, small project, we'll do it. And, you know, that thing hurt us all the way through that job. You know, just, you never got out from under that one statement. So I think, it's an interesting dynamic because the AIA contracts, you know, nothing, you know, bad about them. They're great, but they can be cumbersome to work with to some extent. And some firms, I think, have their own internal. We have our own internal. I mentioned we started as an engineering on the land development side. We do a lot of, we used to, I think we've grown out of some of the smaller scale, real small scale, but, you know, simple projects for a few $1,000s way back in the day. You had a quick little letter template. And it's hard to not continue using those because they're easy, but the risk for those just continues. You know, I think that we all need to pay attention to it up front. Scopes need to be very, very clear. We need to really spend the extra time.
At the beginning, that setup phase, we keep coming back to it, but the way you set the project up, the way you set the standards up, the way you aim to create workflows that execute against those contract standards, everything we're talking about always comes back to the setup of that project, right?
Yep. Yep, that's very true. Once it's done well and you can use it as the, the template moving forward for other projects, it definitely helps. And when a lot of our repeat work, it's great. Oh yeah, we already have a contract in place. This is great. We quickly move forward. And it's easy to push them out the door, as far as the contracts go. But yeah, it's it's definitely a challenge. And it's the same thing during construction. You have the document phase is the shortest, but it's the most important to us, right? But that's the part that's right in the middle, right? You got the whole contract stuff, then you got the documents, and then you got the construction of it, which takes, gads longer than the documents do. And we're living with that. Part 3 is nice. It's got the whole issued for construction set that we use in there, and the specs are right in there, and it is nice to have that at our fingertips during that whole construction aspect of it.
Yeah, I feel like you're doing, maybe paraphrasing, but it sounds like some of the lowest risk firms have maybe got a few behaviors in common, but referencing the contract data in every decision point during construction, controlling, that's the first. Second would probably be controlling. You've mentioned control a handful of times, but making sure you control your own record of truth, as opposed to maybe relying on the contractors' portals or data that can be a little bit fragmented. And it is fragmented, right? Like my favorite term around construction, as someone who wasn't able to brag that our company hasn't been around for 40 or 120 years. But my learning in 5 years in construction is the most fragmented industry, but it is the most collaborative industry in the world. Every project has got data and teams from 10, 20 different companies all working together, and then all the other subs that get involved at different stage. So controlling your own record of truth, not relying on others, and then treating document control as risk control, not as administration, but treating it as a really core central function. Is that a fair way to capture if I was to turn this around and say Barb's tips and tricks for risk management, is that fair?
I think you nailed it.
You can have that. You can
I'm going to use those now.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
It's a really interesting point, Jack and Barbara, in the context of, Barbara's done a really good job with her team ensuring that they have basically the right templates and tools, learning from some of the mistakes, obviously, to lock in some of those things. And I think, as they use AIA and they use other documents, sort of starting from your baseline playbook and standard as your risk control tool, understanding you'll have to make some modifications along the way, and being okay with that, but having that strong starting point is really crucial. We hear it as we talk to insurers as well. Having that playbook and starting with something like an AIA contract doc, actually, believe it or not, when you're working with an insurer, helps you save money along the lines, which, money is one of the biggest risks across the project, right? Because it is what you end up having to outlay or not receive when a risk occurs. And insurers really value, firms that start with a set of standards, whether it's their own or it's ours, and really appreciate the fact that that's your starting risk control method, right? The worst thing that could happen is every time you start a contract, it's like a brand new contract with the first word on the first page, right? Have something that you've already sort of tested and had as tried and true, which is super important. And it's great to hear that Barb's sort of managing that through the firm as they go through there.
Yeah, I think that's the living, breathing documents, whether it's AIA or not, and having them kind of, you instill that lesson from the last one into the next one. And you're like, okay, let's make sure we cover that. And it just keeps kind of growing to some extent, but just getting better and more thorough. And I think that's, we've done that very well on both of ours, whether, either types of contracts, and using the tools, right? I mean, I think we educate our people on using them. Field reports, same thing, using the templates and keeping everything live. I mean, that's something that we couldn't have done 10 years ago, but now we have portals that somebody can be out in the field and open up their even if it's on your little phone, you can still see what somebody else is doing. I mean, it is a kind of a crazy, ever-changing world we're in. And Jack, when you say the largest amount of teams it is crazy how many people are involved in some of these projects, these construction projects. When you go out there and you see that there's 40 different subs on the site and, hundreds of people working every day to build these buildings, and you're realizing, holy crap, the collaboration that goes on is amazing. Yeah, it is truly a different, and the specialties, even on, the engineering, architecture, there's specialties now that exist that didn't exist years ago, technology and low voltage and Wi-Fi specialties. And, it is amazing. So there's a lot of collaboration.
And there's too many different parties involved to kind of rely on any one of them, whether it's the contractor or anyone else, to do document control and risk management for every single party involved. So I don't really want to advocate for every single firm needing to double enter and duplicate all of their own admin, but risk management is going to be a central component and probably a pretty essential value proposition for everyone working in construction. So making sure you can at least track and trace every event, every decision made, every decision articulated, making sure you've got good records to articulate those is definitely essential. I think technology is playing a good role. I promised today that this would be the first time I talk without going on an AI rant, so I won't do that. I'll save that for another time. But anyone who's able to sort of make risk management and documentation a function that feels non-functional, it happens in the background, it's automated, but it's structured, it's reliable. I think those are the firms that are benefiting now. So we're coming pretty close to our end, and I'm starting to see a scary amount of messages in the chat and questions. So we should probably start thinking about them. So if we were going to wrap up, and I put you guys on the spot for a second, what key takeaways, maybe one key takeaway each that we would love our audience to walk away from today?
Sure, I'll go first, and I'll do my best to be quick. But I think, as I mentioned before, if you can start with a standard that has the follow-on standards, I think you're creating a really strong risk management program, right? And you've got a really good baseline to manage against, and hopefully that will lead to better communication, a more collaborative team, and some shared vision on the results, and that would really be something I think would help across the board, knowing that risks never go away.
Yeah, I'll add from our side, architects and engineers side, I think it starts in the communication and the flow of information and making sure everybody's using the same baseline and sharing. And, it's tricky, but that's we're living and dying by sharing information right from the get-go, making sure everybody knows what we're designing to, what we're drawing to, and then what we're building to.
Yeah, I love that. I think I would only add, just to reiterate, risk lives in the gaps. Reduce the gaps, reduce the risk. So own your data, own your dates, and own your decisions. That would be my advice for anyone listening here today. So we're coming to the end. We maybe hand over, pull in Amrita. We'd love to start fielding some of the questions you've got. Like we said, might not get to all of them, but we'll do our best.
Sounds good. And thanks everybody for putting in your questions. Just a reminder that if you have questions that you haven't put in yet, in your console, you'll see a questions button with a question mark in a circle. Use that one. It's a little easier for us to follow along with instead of the chat. So one question, which I think is probably a really big question that we'll probably just want maybe a short answer from everyone, but what are some of the pluses and minuses of using AI? And in particular, people have mentioned that not everyone's comfortable having AI in the meetings, but in general, what are some of the pluses and minuses you've each seen in how AI has now been brought into the process?
You want me to jump in first? I think that the challenge with AI is every different AI is different, right? But we've seen it's crazy some of the stuff it takes down from notes, and you're reading it back and you're like, no one said that, these random words that get thrown in there. So I think the risk is if you're recording something and you don't spend the few minutes looking at it right before, and then you file it away and then you open it, 6 months later, and you're like, it's gibberish. So to me, I don't think it's quite there yet. In most of them, you still need the human interaction just to verify.
Yeah, I feel like AI's role is becoming like we don't want to over rely on it. And I think we all know that. And then we use that as a little bit of a reason to object to AI. So I agree. AI note takers hallucinate. I've got an English accent and I'm quite a passionate speaker on a good day. So half the notes that an AI note taker captures from me, total gibberish. But what it does well is it relieves me from taking the notes manually. I guarantee that the recording lives somewhere. And when I need to just search through last week's 35 meetings that I had and find when was I talking about risk and control, I can search and find it quickly, and then I can go and get the exact thing. So is it a 100% accurate record? Absolutely not. But is it really good at logging unstructured data, making it searchable, findable, indexable? Absolutely. And we're talking about note takers, but the same can be said for tools that help in every phase of the project, whether it's helping you write and design construction documents, whether it's helping you manage different tasks in the CA phase. It's not there to be a crutch. It's there to make unstructured data searchable, indexable, usable.
I don't know that I have that much more to add, because I would agree with both of those things. I think, as we've looked at AI and our solution, I think there's, opportunities where it will help in the complex situations that you have as a business. I think it's also a really great companion to the points that Jack and Barb just made, right? It's a great companion to use to help you capture the things that you might miss, and or make it sound a little bit better, be in a better structure that you can leverage later. And I think that's a value add in the market today that I think at the very least you can leverage it as that type of tool to help you do certain discrete tasks that may take you away or distract you from the intent of what you're participating in. And I think that's really valuable.
Next question is for Barbara. So we've touched upon that you've been involved in both small and large firm environments. Do you have any advice on quality control of construction documents in terms of doing that in-house or using a quality control consultant?
Done it all different ways. And I think as a smaller firm, it is harder because you have less resources. We are pretty lucky here at BL that we have some very well-versed individuals that are excellent at QA/QCing multidiscipline types of work. But when I was in smaller offices that weren't quite as had all the different skill sets, we would outsource it. The challenge there is it can be costly, and it's pretty hard to absorb that cost on your own. So it's definitely a little bit of a juggling act of the cost of the project and whatever. I mean, I think the best advice is always have another team, somebody that's outside the project team reviewing things. I mean, that's like your simplest, you have a project architect, even if you only have 2 project architects, have the other one review documents for, each other's work, because you don't catch it. It's just like me writing a contract. Like, I'm not going to catch something that I wrote. So I have a different project manager should review the contracts, right? But yeah, there's all sorts of different ways to handle that. I don't know that there's a perfect answer. I think it depends on the size of the project and the volume.
Great, thanks. Next question is, how do you create consistency in documentation and contracts when every project is different?
Therein lies the gap.
Right. I'm looking at Luke. Luke's looking at Barb. Who wants to touch this one first?
That's so challenging, because it's very true. And I think that's where the biggest struggle is in that you want to describe things, at least from our perspective, we want to describe things because you want to create templates. So you want to be somewhat generic, and you want to use words like warehouse and typical power and, all these things, but then they bite you in the ass later. So, it is a fine line of creating documents that are honed in enough. Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer for that one.
I'm not a practitioner, right? So it's a little hard for me to think about it, but
Nice.
I think that, again, I mean, selfishly, I think that, we kind of consider ourselves a really good starting point. But again, we are just that starting point, right? All of our customers are able to modify all of our documents to the extent that they need to. So to the extent that you can build out, your set of preferred clauses, your templates, your things that you can reference really quickly, based on scenarios that you've faced before, good or bad, that at least helps it make it a little easier, right? And as you work through our tools, as you work with systems like Part 3, the data and information is there to at least make it easier. And then unfortunately, you've got to make a decision, right? And you've got to collaborate with your team and try to establish what's next. But there are tools out there. There are firms like Barb's that have sort of tried to implement this somewhat standardization of at least processes, this as at least a good jumping off point, knowing that you will have to pivot in different processes, and everybody does. So I don't know that there's a catch-all or one answer in this type of situation.
Thanks, Luke. This next one I think is for Jack and Barbara. So if an architectural firm who is leading the project has interest in using a tool like Part 3, are there some best practices you've seen in terms of how to foster participation from outside parties like consultants and contractors and owners?
That's a really good question. And you might have a lot more credibility to answer this one than me, Barb. So maybe we can lean on your practical experience of doing this out in the field, but I'm happy to share what I've learned from others that have adopted it and done this really, really well, because it does make a big difference, right? The more that you can bring in the sub-consultants, or the more you can bring in involved parties, the sort of better coverage you get, the better experience you get from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it. We transitioned over to Part 3 a year ago, actually, I think the end of last year, beginning of this year. And it is, it is always a challenge to get people on board with something new. It's very easy to learn. It's very intuitive. And I don't think anybody's, once, you set up a nice process, you go through it, you get everybody on board. It's pretty quick. I think we lagged a little bit because we thought it was going to be harder to connect to the GC's Procore than it really is. That was on us. It took us through the first quarter. I don't even think we started doing that until it was much later than we should have, because when we realized how easy it was like, oh my gosh, we should have been doing that right from day one. But I think our team was a little intimidated. We reach out to the GCs and we say, hey, this is what we're using. And we walk them through whatever it is. It's literally, I think, 3 or 4 clicks. It's really not hard. And we've had no backlash of, why we're not using just their platforms. Yeah,
I think the best experiences I've learned are, we definitely as a software tend to the consultant side of things, right? So right off the bat, you can ease of use with the contractor, because you're going to basically tell your GC, don't worry about it. Either we'll integrate with your Procore, keep doing what you're doing in Procore, or you can just input stuff, or we'll upload it for you, whatever. So trying to remove friction with the contractor is easy, but sub-consultant involvement is really critical. We've done a few things. So we've got some suggested content or some suggested copy. A lot of architects tend to write Part 3 into their specs, into their CDs, so that you're actually mandating the use from your sub-consultant team, making sure the engineers and the consultants get involved the way you'd want them to, introduce those workflows. Like we keep hitting on, the setup at the start of the project is so important. So that seems to be really advantageous. But the Part 3 team leans in really heavy too. We've got support and onboarding teams. We've got great in-house construction administrators, former people who have worked in architecture firms, engineering firms, that are great at helping do onboarding sessions, training sessions. But candidly, the first time you send an engineer an invite to collaborate on a shop drawing, they either love it or they hate it. So we just try and make sure that's a really easy to understand, easy to use experience. And once you get them that first invite to jam on a shop drawing with you, they'll tell you what they think, and they should be all right after that point. It's pretty, like Barb said, it's pretty intuitive to get stuck in.
Great. We do have other questions, but I'm afraid we are going to be running out of time. I did notice that there were some questions that were specific to Part 3 or AIA Contract Documents. Jack, maybe you can let everyone know how they can learn more, and we will also follow up with anyone individually as well.
We'd be happy to tell you more about how firms like Barb's firm at BL Group have adopted Part 3, how they've got up and running, how they managed to manage risk throughout the CA phase by bringing their construction documents in. Next week, we're going to run a demo. I think it's with me, yours truly. I'll be hosting a quick walkthrough. I'll give you an overview of what Part 3 can do, how firms are using it today. I'll go through everything from how to get your CDs in, how AI can be used to pull your drawings apart, make sure we can kind of use that as a foundation for every construction administration activity beyond. So if you scan that QR code, you'll get to hear my voice even more next week. We'll walk through the app and see if we can get you started.
And Luke,
I'm pretty,
yeah.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, just, obviously anybody can go to AIAcontracts.com. You can scan the QR code here to book a demo of ACD and our Katina platform. And, if you go to the website, tons of resources, I think that will help answer some of the questions around like when and where to use different types of documents, what are the families, when and what the easiest way to engage with counsel on these types of things. So ton of great resources. We hope everybody checks them out, and really looking forward to seeing folks continue to use our documents, and really appreciative of Jack and Barbara today to tag team with this. It was exciting to talk to everybody.
I had a good time. I hope you guys did too.
Yeah.
Hope so. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We are going to send the recording out. We had some questions about that, so look out for that in your email in the coming 24 hours, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers, everybody. Appreciate it.